Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. And today I have a very special guest, Eyla Cuenca. We met in February of 2021 at an event, a women's event called Empowered in Miami. And I heard her speak. I met her in real life. She's just got such an amazing, loving, grounded energy. But she's also someone who is not afraid to stand up and advocate for others and women. So, Eyla, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this since we met. I've been wanting to have this conversation. So I'm glad we're doing it.
So you are a holistic birth educator from preconception to parenting. And you started as a birth photographer, and that was before or after you had your daughter?
That was before. So I was a photographer by trade, and when I moved to Miami, I started doing birth photography actually, and I through that found a training to become a doula. And when I was in that process was actually when I became pregnant with my daughter, and so it was all happening at the same time. And it was just the perfect storm, I'd call it, actually.
Yes. So did you choose to become a doula because of what you had seen in the birth photography and you wanted to prepare yourself? Were you nervous about birth before you actually gave birth?
Actually, well, I'm an anthropology major, so that's what I studied in college was anthropology and photography, and I wanted to, the plan was to become a photographer that would basically photo document anthropological research. I didn't want a family, I didn't want to be married, I didn't want kids, I just wanted to travel the world and examine the human condition and how we arrived at where we are now. And so it was actually this homecoming for me when I was photographing birth, because it kind of brought me back to where I had originally started in a sense. And I've always viewed birth as a very normal biological function. I never had fear around it. I never thought that women should be medicated. For me, it's always been if your body can make a baby, it can birth a baby. There's nothing else to it, right? And so when I was in the birth space, that was kind of supported. That idea I had was supported. I had seen so many women give birth in my anthropological research and in my studies that it just seemed like the next thing, the next step, I should say. So in the birth space as a photographer, I wanted to start offering what I saw as the support where there was a deficit. I started seeing that women, as much as they were preparing and educating themselves, they didn't have that community support that I had noticed in my anthropological studies, right? We don't have that tribal support anymore. It was there was a midwife, or there was an OB, or there were nurses, maybe her sister was there, her mom, but there wasn't this person who could just hold a neutral energy, and support and advocate in a way that wasn't so personal, right? Because family, it becomes personal, or the medical staff, it's personal for them because they're looking at the birth through a clinical or legal or political logic, whereas families looking at, this whole experience is through their personal lens. So it's there has to be someone who can just hold space for the mother and support her lens and her perspective. And so that's when I decided to train as a doula, and it was perfect because I already was having my own experience in my pregnancy, and so I could relate in that way. And like I said, it just all came together really wonderfully.
So one thing you just mentioned, and it's something that really stuck with me, if you can make a baby, you can birth a baby. And there's a lot of fear around having children over a certain age. I'm 35. Would I be considered advanced maternal age at this point?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask, but by mainstream standards, you've entered into the geriatric pregnancy realm.
Which is so interesting. And in your experience, have you seen women in their 40s have natural vaginal at-home deliveries?
Yeah, absolutely. I've attended many home births, even hospital births that are unmedicated. Women 42, 44 years old, definitely late 30s. I mean, it's so common in society today because most women, spend the bulk of their 20s and 30s in education and in personal and self-development. So most women are birthing in their, late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, and they're up against this whole idea that once, the day they turn 35, it's like from one day to the next, right? So you're 34, the day before your 35th birthday, everything's fine. You turn 35 the next day and suddenly you're in a new category of high risk pregnancy. So I just wanted to be clear that if your body has created the baby and is holding the pregnancy, there is then no issue for giving birth. All right. So they're exclusive from one another. So if you got pregnant, you can do it.
Well, I'm 35. I would feel much more comfortable, prepared, and actually embracing the birth experience today than I would at 25. And 11 years ago, actually, I was in nursing school and I was 24 years old. There was absolutely no way I would even consider a vaginal delivery. And I'm very, very lucky where I went to nursing school. I had an amazing teacher. She was a strong personality, but she told it like it was, and it actually became one of my favorite classes. I was pretty surprised. And one of the things that we got to see were births, vaginal deliveries in the hospital, as no home births, but also cesareans. And when I saw the two, wow, I mean, I'm grateful there's a time and a place. I do think that perhaps we overdo them, and we can talk about that. But in a medical emergency, if that's something that needs to be done, it's not something I want to go through. And that used to be my first choice. Oh, I can just cut it out, be good to go. But I've learned so much about the benefits.
Right.
And it's almost like the body designed us to have children in a certain way. So if we can do that, that would be my preference, my strong preference. But I had so much fear because of my beliefs. So let's just say you have a belief you're 35 and you're now a ticking time bomb and your body can't do what it's been built to do. Then if you don't believe that, what are your chances of following through with that? Or if my belief is from the TV, what's a good example? That movie with Seth Rogen.
Knocked Up. But also Look Who's Talking with Kirstie Alley, right, from when we were kids, and John Travolta, where this woman is pregnant and she's on her way to the hospital and she's in a taxi cab and she's screaming and she's like, I just need the drugs, just get me to the hospital. And she gets there and she gets the drugs and it's like, she just goes, oh, like everything is right with the world now. And so that's how we perceive birth. That's how we're trained to understand this process, that we just need to get into a medicalized, drugged state in order for us to be okay with the situation.
And that's what's so important. I teach about this in coaching and I talk about it on Instagram, the power of belief. If you do not believe that you can do something, your brain will find evidence of why that's true. And what I've learned is that the pain, more so contractions, come in waves. I don't know if you know who Leslie Burris is. She actually live streamed her birth on Instagram. Did you see that? It was so beautiful. She's had other births before. And so what she did was, I think it was live for about 40 hours. And there were thousands of people watching this. It was very, very beautiful. She didn't show anything graphic. She was in a tub and you didn't see the baby come out, but you could see her. And so she would have a contraction and show what that was like and then go back to doing whatever she was doing. And she knew that these were waves that would pass. If I felt such intense pain and didn't know that that was part of it, that was actually my body doing what it was supposed to do and that it would pass, I would probably freak out. So if you're terrified, how would that magnify the pain, or would it?
Yeah, so one basic thing that begins to happen when we feel fear is we start to breathe in the chest. And so naturally the body starts to constrict and we start to work against this naturally formed sensation that's being created. And that resistance in itself becomes a struggle, a conflict, a challenge that the woman is now mentally grappling with. Not only physically, but mentally grappling with as well. So there's that to begin with. And then there's that fear of the unknown, right? And so like you said, you don't know when it's going to end. And so I tell my students, you have to surrender to the possibility that you don't have, or the reality, I should say, that you don't have control over this. You don't know when the baby's going to be born. I can't tell you, you've had this amount of contractions and we only have this amount left. You have to trust that your body is going to do this in the way that it's supposed to for your particular birth. So there is a lot of mental preparation that goes into this, and I'd say that's half the battle, really, is just allowing this to unfold and to trust the process. It's easier to trust the process when you go through the foundations of understanding how this is a physiological event, and also understanding interventions and understanding how emergencies happen. So I feel like when we really go through those 3 tracks, then women feel so much more comfortable surrendering to this process. And so that the course that I offer is really like a crash course in obstetrics, because we talk about heart monitoring, we talk about Pitocin and epidurals, we talk about how this cascade effect can occur, how we can end up in an unwanted C-section, and how we have a misconception that hospital birth is actually safer. And so we really unpack that. And we really start to understand that home birth is, or unmedicated birth is the safer option. And we get into this kind of sticky territory when we go into these, high intervention births. And so once that's understood, women say, okay. And then the other component is getting a team together that supports you. Whether it's, your husband, partner being fully on board, or it's your best friend, or you have a doula and a midwife, or, you've formed an authentic and honest relationship with your OB, like whatever it is, we work on that component of it. Because women in hypervigilance cannot surrender and relax. They stay in survival mode. They're managing logistics. They are on high alert, waiting for the ball to drop. So you can't really give birth in a surrendered way when you are managing in this hypervigilant state.
And in any situation, I would, whether you're in the hospital or not, to have an advocate. Because when you're not feeling well, or when you're going through something that is a challenge, you're so focused on and you're so in the moment that it's really hard to think about all these other things. So if you have someone where you've talked about in all these situations, this is what I would like, you can have someone to advocate for you. And then you can focus on the delivery itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to talk about some of the limiting beliefs and just beliefs that women have around birth. I'll share some of mine. One is that if I have a vaginal delivery, then that's it. I'm no good. No one's going to want to have sex with me again. And what do you think about that?
Sometimes women say, I don't have any sex drive after this experience, because their body literally shuts down and goes into a protective state. Sometimes what I see is when the husband or the partner doesn't advocate for her in the birth room, she then is feeling abandoned or left behind, not supported after the birth, and that can actually diminish the eros between them after the birth. So depending on how the birth goes, there's potential for alchemy. Even if it is traumatic and there is unwanted touch, there is also potential for alchemy there. If we're talking about tissue itself and like the regeneration of tissue, there is a lot that you can do during the pregnancy to prepare the perineum, perineal massage. You can do Kegel exercises. You can work with yoni eggs. You can do a lot of lubrication practices, with different oils, and you can do that reconnection in the pregnancy and prepare the tissue and then give it elasticity. You can take collagen. I mean, there's so much that you can do, and then afterwards it takes time, but you start to do those exercises again and the body comes back to, I would say, an even better state than it was in before, really. It just depends on how much attention you want to give it.
Beautifully said. And I have heard that. I've asked a lot of men. I did my own market research. I have not encountered someone who, unless they were much younger and they felt they had the same belief system, but men who are in committed relationships are like, it brought us closer together and we have better sex, we're more connected. So I think that is a huge misconception. I absolutely had that belief. Okay, I have a child and that's it, and no one's going to want to be intimate with me. But if that's something you believe, I would strongly encourage you to challenge that. And as far as the things that you mentioned about preparing your body and the elasticity of the tissue, is that something you would teach in your course?
Yeah, it's something that I give support with. there's practitioners here in Miami that I have found who are prenatal massage therapists that I talk to them and I say, this client is looking for a perineal massage. Can you show her how? So it's usually a doula who's a prenatal massage therapist, and then she'll show the client how to do the perineal massage, give her the practice, show her how to do it with a mirror, and then she develops her own daily practice and uses the oils she wants, and then she feels even more connected at the birth, because now her body's been given that energy and that attention, and it's not like kind of cold turkey where suddenly at the birth is the first time that this area has really been activated. So yeah, I talk about that in the course, and I strongly encourage couples to get involved together to activate this portal, in a safe way.
And I love that you refer to it as a portal. And so for someone who's listening, why might you call it that?
It's a portal because it's an opportunity where alchemy can happen. It's a place where you enter and you come out different, right? So you go in one way, you come out another way. You enter as a maiden, you exit as a mother, and the portal you can be in that portal, in that space for, a few hours or a few days. It's really this beautiful alchemical cauldron. So that's why I like to call it a portal.
And quite literally a portal.
Quite literally. For the baby, too. It's going through a portal, a doorway.
So it's one of the most natural things that we can do. Every single one of us was born.
Yes.
Yet there's so much fear around it. So I would say another belief, I talked about, will my vagina come back? Will I be able to be intimate? Am I too old? I don't believe that anymore. Pain. So how can you share about the pain and maybe reframe that in a different way? Because it is uncomfortable and unpleasant at times, but can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and we do limiting belief exercises in my course, and it's not only about the pain. We start to go into limiting beliefs about what kind of a mother will I be? My mother didn't show up for me. Will I be able to show up for my child? We sometimes we even get into limiting beliefs about finances. I mean, when you start to look at limiting beliefs, the web is very, very wide. It's a very wide casting net. And so we sometimes, why I'm saying this is because when we sometimes unlock these other elements of our fears, we start to narrow it down to the pain. It's not really afraid of the pain, like my body can't handle it. It's really that we have fear that a lot of these other things in our lives we don't have control over. And so I like to do a lot of this kind of self-reflexive work in the course so that people can see the anxiety I'm holding is not so much about this event. It's what this event represents in the grand scheme of my life. And so I would say it's a good opportunity to check where you're feeling like you don't have control over things, and how can you either surrender, release, or reframe. And so we do limiting beliefs around that. I remind people that the body creates these sensations. It's not bigger than you. It's not like you were injured or a bone was broken. You have no idea how it's going to heal, when it's going to heal, will it ever end? It's something coming from the outside. But birth is something your body is simply, doing on its own. Contractions are being created by the body to support you. So we have to remove ourselves from this antagonistic dynamic that we seem to go into during the labor process, where it's like my body's working against me. It's like we're up against each other, or it's like, no, the body's just supporting you. It's just trying to get your baby out, the baby that you wanted, the baby that you created. Now the body's like, all right, I'm here to support you. Let's do it. So you have to get on the same team as your body, and you have to trust that your body is leading you in the right direction. And again, it's, is there anything that's happened to my body in the past where my body goes into high alert if it's touched? My body goes into high alert when it hears certain sounds or smells certain smells. So you have to get in touch with what your body likes and what your body doesn't like, and also create that, so you can create that condition during the time of your labor. So if you've had many bad experiences in a hospital, maybe you were someone who was sick in childhood, or one of your family members passed away and you spent a lot of time in a hospital, consider that might not be the environment that supports your system for this experience, right? So you want to, I'm talking about all of this because these are the ways that we mitigate the pain, the quote unquote pain, is by setting ourselves up to feel safe and surrendered. So yeah, the body creates the sensations of labor, so it's never going to be bigger than you. It's never going to kill you. It's never going to overpower you. It's something that you work together with your body to move through.
Yes, and I think the relationship with pain and the story we're telling ourselves, something's wrong or something bad is happening, or this is actually part of the experience. And I think if our body does not feel safe, do you think that that's going to stall labor?
Absolutely. I mean, in my own experience, I was safe in my house with my husband and my midwife and her assistant. And even in that, even in that experience, I was having memories of certain instances that had happened in my life that I hadn't thought about in years. And I was like, oh, when the midwife touched my back a certain way, it reminded me of that. And I had a flashback and I was like, wow, I didn't realize that was there, So any little thing can come up. And so the pregnancy is an opportunity to just take inventory of what kind of touch does my body like, doesn't like, what kind of environment does my body like or doesn't like. Where do I feel safe? And, I hear so many women betraying themselves when they're preparing for their birth by like, my sister-in-law is coming or my mother-in-law will be there. And I don't really have a great relationship with her, but she wants to be there because, it's her grandchild. And it's like a lot of women will sacrifice their own safety and comfort just to please other people for this big life event. So I really want to encourage women to read this book, Unbound. Okay, this is like a shameless plug for something I don't even get credit for, but it's like, I love this book, and I think every woman should really read it, whether you're pregnant or not. It's called Unbound by Kostya Urbaniak, and it really shows you how to reclaim boundaries in small ways every day in your life, and it has helped so many of my clients over the years get to a place of safety in their pregnancy and in their birth. Even like with their medical providers, they even have an easier time talking to their doctors or their midwives after doing the exercises in this book. Like, you'll get through it in 4 days and you'll feel like a changed woman. So I'm her hype woman. She doesn't even know me, but it's really an amazing book. So yeah, I would say that really getting familiar with yourself and your pain and pleasure thresholds, open communication with your partner, whoever's going to be there, is also going to assist you with feeling the quote unquote pain, and using a different word for that, using the word discomfort, using the word sensation, using the word experience. I'm about to have this experience, right? Not I'm going to experience pain. I'm going to have an experience, and I don't actually know what it's going to be like because I've never done it before. So how can I say it's going to be painful if I've actually never done it before? So keep that in your mind as well. And then ultimately, undoing the years of conditioning from Hollywood, right? Like all the stories we've heard from friends and family, or things we've seen on the news, or things we've seen in Hollywood. It's like, that is one fear-based dimension that we can either choose to participate in or not. It's that simple.
So another belief is that home births are dangerous. And I have seen a home birth. I have met many women who have delivered their children at home. So what would you say to somebody who has the belief that it is not safe to do a home birth?
Well, first, I would encourage women to understand, or people to understand, what a midwife actually is, and maybe take a look at the history of midwifery and birth, and when we actually started birthing in hospitals and why. So first of all, when you connect with a midwife who is a medical professional who's done extensive training in birth and neonatal care, prenatal care, she is someone who can basically offer you whatever types of exams you want, right? So if you're somebody who's like, oh, I need to have blood work and ultrasounds and all this kind of stuff, she can offer that. She can write orders for that and, make sure that you get all of that. But she's not going to take you as a client if you score in high risk, right? So she's going to do a risk assessment, and she's going to say, okay, you have a history of diabetes and high blood pressure, and there are some markers here indicating that there is, mental illness, let's say. I'm just throwing that out there. She's not going to take you as a client. So there's a belief that you just go to a midwife and it's like some witch in a hut somewhere, and she's just kind of operating outside of the system and doesn't consider your medical history, doesn't consider your mental health, doesn't consider this greater context, right? And so just know that they're incredibly professional medical providers who are considering your safety at every turn. And it's highly personalized concierge care because they have a significantly smaller amount of clients that they are working with day to day than an OB's office would, for example. So know that you are getting really specialized care. And so just in that, you've already eliminated the possibility that they're not going to, that something's going to crop up in the pregnancy or in the birth that you didn't expect, because they've really examined you and assessed you. I would say that often, women are birthing in these conventional settings with OBs, and a lot gets overlooked actually because there's such a high volume of women. They're not getting the specialized attention that every woman really is worthy of. So just in that in and of itself, I felt safer, and a lot of my clients feel safer with midwives because we're getting such personalized care. And then let's look at the history a little bit of birth. Women didn't really start birthing in hospitals until like the 1890s, and it was a very small percentage of women. And it wasn't until the 1940s that we started seeing this big shift happen where about 50% of women were birthing in hospitals. And this is when pharma was making a big push for women to come into the hospital, get twilight sleep, which is just basically going under. And it was the beginning of the knock 'em out, drag 'em out era, where women were being knocked out and babies were being dragged out. And the big appeal was that women no longer had to live in their tiny urban apartments with 6 kids and give birth. They could leave that kind of like cramped space and go to this really luxurious place where everything was clean and there were nurses doting on her and there was someone to take care of the baby while she could rest, and she didn't have to deal with, caring for her large family at home. And this was appealing to women in these cities like London and New York that were cramped. And, women were eating really, processed foods, low nutrition foods. And so they were developing, gestational diabetes. They were having hemorrhages. They were there was a high mortality rate postpartum because the conditions were not really set up to support women postpartum. And so in the hospital, women were being fed. They had the spaciousness. We saw a decline in the mortality, not because women were birthing in hospitals and birth became safer, but because women actually had support in hospitals. Does that make sense? And so now we have a really high mortality rate for women and babies, and in present day, and that's because births are highly medicalized and the birthing process is interfered with, and women are not getting great postpartum care in hospitals. And so we did see an improvement at that time, and so we have a perception that birth became safer at that time because less women were dying, but it's not because birth was being managed, just because women had postpartum support. So I think it's an important distinction to make there. And so it was around the 1960s that I'd say 80% of women were birthing in hospitals, and now we're at like 99% of women birth in hospitals in the US. Really, I know we think home birth is really common, but it's not. It's just because we're on Instagram and we see home birth photos and videos, but we're in a vacuum really in this community. And so it's not common. But home birth for me is always safer because women's process is not being interfered with. They're getting concierge care. And if there's any red flags, midwives have no problem transferring you out of their care to see an OB. It is not negligent by any means. And of course, anytime a midwife has a complication come up in her practice, it is smeared all over the news. And, there's a witch hunt and her license is taken away. So we hear about these instances from time to time and they stick, in our minds, but we do not see all of the instances of iatrogenesis happening in hospitals, which I have actually witnessed firsthand. Actual deaths happening at the hands of a doctor, and that's never talked about on the news. It's never publicly put on display because they have excellent malpractice insurance and, they're supported by the hospital.
So something you mentioned was that a lot of women would pass after giving birth prior. So there's not a lot of attention to what I call, or what many call, the 4th trimester. People are so focused on the 9 months or almost 10 months that it takes to create the baby. And then, okay, baby's out, see ya. And then the mom is just often there's a hormone dump that can happen, and just a lot of women struggle with that. So I'm so grateful you're not only providing support prior, but after. And so what do you think that we're missing in those 3 months or even the year after?
Well, just remember, we came from tribes where the entire system was set up to support the woman who had just given birth. Men were doing their duty, which was guarding the perimeter of the tribe, providing food, shelter, and safety, and women were within the tribe supporting each other and raising the children. So there was no deficit. So this whole thing of having the husband in the birth room and the husband being at home with you the first few weeks, that's a newly created thing. That's not how it was supposed to be. That's not how it was. It's just where we've been pushed to now because women are alone. Women come, live far away from their nuclear families. They started a family in a new city. They have some girlfriends maybe in town who might stop by and bring them food, or they have to hire help in order to get the support. They have to join a mom group. They join an online community. And so women are pretty much dropped. And now there's a lot of pressure on the husband or the partner to fill that gap when it's really not his role. And so I would say that what we can do now is build a community while you're pregnant. We're not going to return to this tribal lifestyle. It's not realistic. I know people try to do that by living on communes and going to farms and things like that, but we're just not set up that way anymore. And so we can build communities in pregnancy, meet other women who are like-minded, meet a doula who does postpartum work and support. She can come to your house maybe twice a week after the birth. Find something online, that you can check in with maybe weekly, like La Leche League. But really, it's a symptom. This deficit is a symptom of the way society is set up, especially in the West. Because a lot of women have this misconception that their worth and their value in society is reliant upon how productive they are when we're in the same framework as men, right? And so as much as we can produce and make money and be relevant, that's our value and that's our worth. And so when we let go of that really skewed concept, and we can see the value and the worth in raising a child in a wholesome and dedicated way, then women will stop feeling that conflict and that pressure and say, wow, it's okay. Like, I don't need to do all that for the next 10 years. I can actually just do this other really, really important, if not more important, work of raising a healthy, conscious child who feels connected to their primary caregiver, which is me, And so there's some internal work to do. And I get it. It's hard. We've been conditioned from early childhood as little girls to run with the men and somehow be like them, which we're not supposed to be, but that's the way that it's set up. And so we get to this place of wanting to have kids and we're in conflict. Wait, I have 3 degrees. Wait, I make more money than my husband. Wait, what do I do now? And so then we go back to work 6 weeks postpartum. We have shame and guilt because our child is in a daycare, or it's with a nanny, or now the baby's home with our husband. And wait, I'm missing out on this experience with my baby. I didn't get to breastfeed. I couldn't produce milk because I was in a high stress situation where I was in conflict about going back to work and whatever. It becomes so complicated and so unpleasant and really challenging for women. So I'd say in pregnancy, there's an opportunity to reorganize the way you want the first year to look, and it can look however you want, and there is no right or wrong. There is just imagine that there's other possibilities besides what maybe your friend did. So I invite women to tap into their instinct, to say, how do I set myself up so that I feel really connected and supported this first year?
Very well said. So obviously I haven't had children, but as an entrepreneur, a great example is when I surround myself with other people who are in the same industry and understand the challenges. It's not complaining about how hard something is. It's how do we figure this out? How do we create a way? And if you're surrounded by other people who've had really bad experiences, of course, it's important to consider all perspectives, but it's also very valuable to hear these stories about what the body can do, because that's not what we're shown from the media. And then as far as bonding, I really think that is so. to respect this person's privacy, I won't say who it is, but I was with someone for a delivery, and they said that they wanted certain things. And I was there with them, and the second that the baby came, skin to skin, we did learn about that in nursing school and how important that is. But very quickly, they wanted to clean the baby. They wanted to put in the eye ointment. And I said, could she just look at her mother before the eye ointment? And this was probably, I think, 5 or 6 minutes after. So how is bonding being compromised in that setting, in the conventional setting?
Yeah, in the conventional, that's a really good question, and it's often overlooked because, like you said earlier, we hyper-focus on those 10 months of pregnancy and the actual birth, and then it's almost like the baby's out and we're like, oh, I haven't given this any thought, And so when a baby is born, it goes through these initiation steps, right? It comes into contact with sound outside the womb. It comes into contact with smell and sight outside the womb. It feels sensation on its skin. The baby does this instinctive breast crawl. It's what we call the breast crawl. What kind of looks like they're doing like a worm movement on the mother's abdomen. And so the baby's doing all of these movements and experiencing all of these sensations, and we really don't want to interfere with that. All mammals do their own version of this as soon as they're born, and it's kind of how they initiate this life outside of the womb. And so when a baby is grabbed by someone else besides the mother, wiped down, their cord is cut, they put a bulb syringe in the throat, move it around, suction the baby's throat and nose. Now the baby is going basically under assault, and its cortisol and adrenaline is going up. It's going into fight or flight. It doesn't understand what's happening. It can't conceptualize any of this. And then it gets to the mother and it's in a state of shock. It doesn't want to breastfeed. Maybe it's crying. It's confused and it's disoriented. And then, we give it maybe 15 minutes, and then we start with the other things. We start with the eye ointment, the erythromycin antibiotic eye ointment. We do the vitamin K injection to coagulate the blood, right? It's not a vitamin, it's a blood coagulant. We start doing hearing tests. We do the pulse oximetry where we, check for the oxygen levels. And then next thing you know, it's been 3 hours and the baby's finally done, wrapped up in a bundle and given to the mom. And the baby's exhausted. Maybe the baby doesn't want to breastfeed because it's just processing all of this overstimulation. And then the mother's concerned because the baby's not eating. And then they start, let's give the baby some sugar water. Or maybe we can give the baby some formula. We can syringe feed it to make sure that it gets food. And the mother's saying, well, what's wrong? Is my body failing? Why won't the baby take my breast? And then we start the cascade of interventions postpartum. So it's best to leave the baby untouched. And how do we get to the privileged and luxurious opportunity of leaving the baby untouched? It's by choosing a non-intervention birth setting, right? A setting where we're not going to intervene with this process, because the more we add to the mother's experience in her labor, most often the more we're going to have to do to the baby once it's born.
It really does make sense. If you think about it, you're in this safe womb, and sure, you can hear outside, I would imagine, because a lot of people say that, the baby can hear the voice. I don't know, but a hospital is a very high stimuli environment, and I have been there, and it's very chaotic. So you go from that, and then I would just instinctively think to be with your mother would feel safer. And I know what happens to a human when they're in fight or flight. And so yes, when you're quite literally taken, I don't know if the child would cry. Is that something that we typically see?
They typically cry initially, and they should, because it helps clear their lungs of any fluid. So it's a natural response. It's wanted. However, after they're taken for the interventions, they usually go into a state of shock, and so they become quiet. This happens also with circumcision, where people say, oh, the baby was totally silent and still during the circumcision. He's fine. He didn't feel anything. People don't realize he's in a complete freeze. It's a survival response. He left his body, checked out.
That's a whole other topic, is circumcision. And honestly, as a female, I grew up with a lot of beliefs around uncircumcised penises, and I thought that, that is so weird. It's actually my preference today. And it's just because of what I was taught and I learned from the media, which influences just cultural beliefs and all of that. And I think it's a lot more common in the US than other places in the world. Is that true?
It's the most popular cosmetic surgery in the US besides rhinoplasty. So yeah, it's not, notice I said cosmetic because it is not actually medically necessary. Mm-hmm. So it's considered a cosmetic surgery.
Is that something that you discuss in the course as well?
I do touch on this topic.
Okay.
And, there are religious beliefs around it, which I don't discuss because, that's a whole other conversation, but I don't debate that. And it's a covenant between people and God. And so it's not something that's up for debate. But if you're doing it simply because, you don't want your son to look different than his dad, or you don't want him to get made fun of in the locker room, those are not really compelling reasons to go through something so severe that does carry a lot of risk for your child.
And can't that also, at least in my experience, some men who have had it performed, it is a different sexual experience. There's a lot less sensation there.
Yeah, there is a lot less sensation, and there is more need to thrust more aggressively simply to access levels of sensation that men who are uncut can access very easily.
Okay, so what about the hormonal dump that happens? And the person that I was with who delivered, I took the placenta home in a cooler. I was like, I hope they don't pull me over because how will I explain this? But I didn't trust myself to encapsulate it. We had someone come, I'm not a great cook. So I wanted someone to come and show us that process. And it was really the most beautiful thing to see this placenta. And it was, I believe, cleaned, steamed, dehydrated, and then it was put into capsules. It could also be in a tincture form. This person did not have any issues with milk production, no depression afterwards. That's something that in that person's family is definitely common, and she was expecting to deal with that. But it really, really helped her. So a lot of people say animals do this, but it's only so that predators don't know that they have a baby. But how do we know that there aren't benefits? So what have you seen in women that choose to consume their placenta?
Yeah, you made a good point there that animals do out in the wild eat their placenta to cover their tracks, but also it's a way that the mother has a meal because she knows she's not going to be able to hunt for a few days. So she recognizes it as a form of sustenance and nutrition after going through a very depleting event. Okay, so that in of itself is showing us that it does offer nutritional value to mammals since the beginning of time. There are not a lot of studies on how placenta encapsulation benefits a woman. You really can't find that, but if you look at sports medicine studies and you look at placental extracts that are taken, stem cells that are taken from placentas and used in sports medicine and surgery, and in Chinese medicine as well, there are amazing effects. I mean, a lot of people are doing this stem cell therapy before, like an ACL surgery, for example. And where do you think they're getting the placenta? They're getting it, the stem cells are getting it from human placenta. And so I would look at those studies to get an idea of, if studies are important to you, to get an idea of how stem cells and placental extract actually benefit the regeneration of the tissue and the body after a surgery, after an event, or before. And what I have seen is really, what I have to offer is just anecdotal evidence over the last decade. Working with women as a placenta encapsulation specialist, I've worked with women who didn't encapsulate their first placenta, they didn't consume it for their first birth, and then they do for the second or the third, and they notice a night and day difference in their recovery, in their moods. They feel more even, they feel more energized, they feel more connected. They don't feel as vata, as kind of up in the air and ungrounded. So this can be a really grounding factor for women. And you don't want to do cold things, meaning a lot of raw foods and salads and smoothies and things like that after birth, because there's, like in Chinese medicine, there's an idea that there's a lot of wind, there's a lot of space in the body after you've given birth. And so you want to replenish that and fill it by, doing broths, warm foods, congee, things that are cooked, and the placenta does offer that. So some people turn placenta into broth. They'll actually take half of it and they'll use that cut up with onions, like you would do liver and onions, and then they take the other half and they encapsulate it and they take it as a supplement. Some people make tinctures where you just steep a piece of the placenta in brandy or grain alcohol, and it works kind of like how homeopathy works, where you take the essence of that substance and you take it over time. And so, yeah, I've noticed that women have night and day differences when they do it the second time or the third time after not doing it for the first birth. So that's why I continue to do it, because I see that it's helping my clients. And I've never had anyone in a decade tell me that they had a negative reaction or they got sick, or, and doctors, nurses will say, oh, this is a bacterial disaster waiting to happen. Who's doing this? Where is it going? And, I would just say, do your research and talk to other women who've done it and speak with a specialist and just get clear on it, because it could really make or break your postpartum experience.
That would be absolutely on my list of essentials. Just from what I have seen, also anecdotally, not in nursing school, that wasn't something that was discussed. I do not believe that delayed cord clamping was discussed either. So that's something, and listen, I have worked for many years as a hospital nurse. You don't have a lot of time. You have a deadline. You've got to get your things done. And I get that part. I really do. And of course, it's always for the safety, or so we are told. But is it best for the mother and the bonding? And one of the issues, I think, in this world, why there's so much emotional pain, so much violence, so much depression, anger, all of these feelings, is because the biggest wound that I've had to learn to heal is it's about receiving love. And how do you think that process of, once again, facilitating bonding could benefit society down the road 20 years from it? It's not just in that moment, but what are the positive benefits of bonding?
Oh, that is such a great question, Ashley. I lead a doula training, so I train other doulas to do this work. And the first half of the training is going, basically we do shadow work for 6 weeks. And one of the assignments is talking to your mother or your father, whoever is the caregiver that can relay the story, about your birth experience. And so as we, talk to our caregiver about our birth experience, we learn a lot about ourselves. And most often what we get back is that we spent time away from our mother immediately following the birth. Either we had jaundice, so we were put in an incubator for, 4 to 6 days under a UV lamp, or there was something with breathing, or whatever the case may be. And as they start to reflect on what it feels like to imagine being separated at birth, a lot comes up. And there isn't a specific modality or exercise that I give to, do a hypnotic regression to remember this, but the body remembers, the body keeps score, right? And so if you just start to reflect on what the events of your birth were, even if you don't consciously remember it, the body will start to talk to you. And so this is a beautiful way to say, okay, I can see where maybe some of my challenges connecting now as an adult are coming from, and I'm ready to release this. I'm ready to repattern this. I'm ready to receive and accept love and support. I'm ready to believe that I am worth being held and cared for, right? Because the baby's system and consciousness starts to get this idea that they're not worth staying with the mother. They are, they're separated, they're put aside. The mother doesn't want them, they're rejected, whatever the case is. And I know there are people who deny that trauma exists or that trauma informs our adult experience, but I do not agree with that. So I'm speaking to the people who acknowledge trauma as a way that we lay our groundwork for relating. And so this is a really great opportunity to go back to that and understand how we bond and how we relate now, and that it could have been affected by our birth experience. Also talking to your mother about what her pregnancy was like. I've had clients, because I do birth trauma processing sessions also, I've had clients who tell me that when their mother was pregnant with them, the mother was on the fence about having an abortion because of maybe turmoil in her marriage, or she was impregnated by somebody she wasn't married to, and there was this fear of having the baby. And so even that can impact the experience that the fetus is having. It's forming their consciousness. It's letting them know, I'm not sure if I want you. I'm not sure if I can keep you. You might not be here. You might be here. And so, do I belong? Becomes a question. Where do I belong? Who wants me? Am I worthy of keeping? So these are all things that are impregnated, no pun intended, into the consciousness and the genetic makeup of the child. And so I would say that if we were able to heal this, mend this, that society would be a totally different place. And that's why we have to look at ourselves. When we're interested in healing society on the whole, and we want to do this work to impact the collective, it has to come from here first, right? We have to look at how we relate and who's behind the wheel. Is it the wounded child, or is it the conscious adult that's healing that's behind the wheel? Or is everyone there behind the wheel and everybody has a voice and we're not responding from trauma, we're responding from a place of love and compassion, right? So like just taking stock of who's behind the wheel, and that's really how the collective is going to start to heal. That's how violence is going to go down. That's how, diminish, I should say. That's how we're going to keep nuclear families together. That's how people are going to stick through things, right? That's how we're going to stop self-betraying. That's how so many things are going to start to untangle, is once we start to understand where this pain is coming from.
Yes, and from an empowered place. So going back to look at your story isn't to, in my opinion, become a victim. It's to say, I want to change the story of what the future of birth will look like in my family. And I want to heal any of the wounds that may have come. The first 7 years of life, that's so important. That's where our beliefs about the world come from. And a good example is a lot of children who have parents who have divorced when they're younger. If the parent hasn't spoken to them about it, a lot of children will internalize that. So I would imagine that would be true in what you're saying. If you're pregnant with a child and you're feeling, or even articulating, I don't know if I actually want this. And so how would a child sense that? Do you believe that a child would sense that?
Absolutely. You're communicating with your baby. They are of you, right? And so it's not just about your prenatal vitamins and how much exercise you're doing, and it's about how you're feeling. How are your hormones spiking or not spiking every day based on your stress level? Like, what are the messages that you're sending to your child? Your fears and your aspirations are one and the same of your child. Like you're giving them that. That's the real nutrition that I talk to people about. What are the belief systems that you're giving your child now? What are you handing down to them?
So beautifully said regarding nutrition, because it's not just what we consume. It's also with food in that sense. It's what we consume, what we're listening to, the thoughts that we think, the conversations we have. And if we've got a lineup of the Kirstie Alley movie, Knocked Up, all these things, that's going to impact how we feel. And if you can, and I just encourage women to expose themselves to all sorts of knowledge, because once again, it is the most important thing I think a woman will go through. And a lot of people don't even understand what's happening in their body. They're just like, well, I'll just go to my checkups, I'm fine. But at least for me, I would want to understand. And if I understand what the sensations mean, then that can change my relationship with it. And it can make me more empowered in that experience.
Absolutely. No, it's the most significant rite of passage you'll go through in your life. And so, you can either participate in it, right? Or you can check out. But we don't know what the outcome is when we check out, because we're leaving it in someone else's hands. And I can say from personal experience, as a doula, as an educator, as a support system for so many women, when we choose not to participate, the results we get are often really damaging, and and I will say, like you just said, it's what we're exposing ourselves to. And so this is also an opportunity to reorganize in our own lives, who we're relating to, who's coming in and out of our lives, how are we assimilating information. And some people say, I don't want to do inner work while I'm pregnant. I don't want to go into my shadow stuff because I don't want to create a state of upset for the baby. I said, no, you're offering a state of release, right? It's almost like a detox where you're letting the baby know and yourself know that you're no longer available for these old patterns and these old belief systems. So you're not only healing yourself, you're healing him or her in the process.
That's a beautiful way to look at it, because that can be a concern women have. Am I going to actually create more stress? But it's really about letting that go to create a safer environment.
Yeah, and you show your child we let go of what's not useful for us, or what's not for our higher purpose or our greater good. We can let this go. We're not scared of letting this go.
A trend that I see in adult hospitalized patients, there's not a lot of personal responsibility. And I am not against the hospital. Time and a place, surgery, emergency,
Sure.
trauma, okay. But when it comes to things that are not necessarily a medical crisis, it's just poorly managed preventative care.
Yeah.
People come in, they say, what do I need to take? Okay, I'm done. And they believe that the doctor makes them healthy. I think that a doctor can be a great team member, but the biggest responsibility falls on that person. And I think if we don't trust ourselves, we're going to struggle to step into that role. So I imagine that would also apply to birth.
Absolutely. And so this is really where codependent dynamics and behaviors come into play. So if we weren't aware of them in our personal romantic relationships or with our family, they become really obvious when we're in a dynamic with a medical provider. Because we start to go into this place of resentment. We start to go into this place where we're looking to them to lead us, but we also don't trust them, but we also can't leave them. And so it's like it reveals itself as very toxic. And so I think this is a beautiful opportunity to say, why don't I trust myself? How can I trust myself more? How can I actually work together with my partner, whoever's on my team, to get what I want? What I actually want, not what other people might want, and not what my friend did, and not what they say over here, but what do I want? So this is a beautiful, beautiful opportunity to do that, to access your inner truth. And you might not know what you want, and you might be like, I'm so overwhelmed. Like, I wish someone would just tell me what to do. And so this is where we can really mature in a sense, and finally start giving our inner girl what she's been denied for so long, which is a voice in her bodily experience.
I love the work that you do. And once again, I haven't even become pregnant. And if I do, I would find a way to come work with you, because I just think that your energy, once again, is so grounded and so loving. And I really feel safe in your presence. And if I was looking for someone to support me in that process, those are the things I would look for. Obviously, knowledge and expertise. What would you suggest if someone isn't working with you? What would they look for in a support person and or doula, or someone who's going to be there? What's important?
So you'll come across doulas who seem like, they have great credentials. They've been to 100 births. They did a great training, and you speak with them and you don't feel that connection. You don't feel safe. You don't feel a groundedness that you need. And so I would say trust what your body is telling you. You might meet a doula or a support person that has only gone to 5 births, and you really feel good in their presence and you trust them and they're offering you. So really go by what your body is telling you is right, not so much like what's up here. Try to give the heart and the body more of the authority in this decision. I would definitely take a class. So even if you're not pregnant now, or you're not even planning to become pregnant anytime soon, understanding birth now will start to help you kind of manifest and organize around what you want your future to look like. And it might also inform your dynamic with your partner if you're in a relationship. So I would say start understanding birth at this moment. Access your own birth story. Talk to your parents about it if that's possible for you. If it's not, then you can do a meditation, or if you pray, you can just ask to be shown what you need to see about your own birth and your process. And whatever comes up first is usually the answer. Just write it down, reflect on it. Just start to get more intimate with what this means. What this life cycle means, in your own world. What does birth mean to you? And of course, I work with people all over the world, so I'm always available to connect with someone no matter where they are. And I'm creating more and more offerings all the time just to support men and women in whatever part of the journey they're in. We have a course that's coming out really soon on creating safety. So no matter what situation you're in, when you feel that charge come up, you can diffuse it and integrate it and use it to your benefit. So this is a really good tool to have in this process as you're preparing for birth and this journey, of parenthood and transformation.
Can you tell us about your courses and your offerings that you have for people?
Yeah. There's the Uncovering Birth Masterclass, which is like conception all the way to parenting. We cover it all. It's a little bit red pilly because I do talk about both sides, of benefits of the conventional system and the downside of the conventional system. So I really, it's not that I'm neutral or I'm on the fence, because I certainly have my own preferences, but I really want people to understand the full spectrum. So I have practitioners take this class. I have men take this class. Everybody's like, wow, this is just part of the human experience. I don't even want kids. I just want to know what this is all about. So there's that foundational course. There's a breastfeeding mini course. This is not so much technique and tips on latch. This is more understanding the greater context of why breastfeeding is so challenging nowadays. And it's not the obvious reasons that one might think, like diet and that, it's a little bit more of how we're structured as a society. So there's the breastfeeding course, there's the creating safety in the body course, and there's also a course coming out that's specifically for men and how they can be a part of this process and really walk through that rite of passage.
Amazing. So I am very excited to share that if you're someone listening to this podcast and you would like to take any of those courses, you can actually get a discount, and that is Ashley Taylor Wellness. So what will that save them percentage-wise?
20% off. So every course is a slightly different price, but it'll get them 20% off. And of course, we have sliding scale and payment plans for everything. So you can always contact us directly and let us know what's up, and we'll work with you. I also have the Uncovering Birth Doula training. And so this is a really amazing opportunity for women to come in and figure out how they want to adjust and expand in their own practice. A lot of women I've trained go on to be death doulas, where they work with people transitioning out of life. They work with women who've had loss of miscarriage and stillborns, and so this is also a really wonderful opportunity to go through your own rebirth process as a support person.
Yes, and I think that is one of the biggest foundational pieces that has disrupted our society. And just women have to get back to work and we have to make money. And like you said, that's where our worth comes from. I have always believed that. The more and more mothers that I coach and speak to, they want to be at home. They just feel like there's something wrong with them or that it's not good enough. And I look at it as the most important job. The hardest job. They say it's very rewarding and fulfilling. And yes, there are challenges, and let's not pretend that there are not. The rewards far outweigh them. And I do believe we'd have a better society if we have more involved parents. So everyone's situation is different, but if you have a belief there's something wrong for wanting to be in that role, I think it's the most important role. And I wish that more people saw the value in that. I know there's not monetary value per se, but if you think about it, it could probably prevent a lot of issues down the road and just have stronger relationships. And what is life without our relationships and connection?
Right. And what's the most important thing to you when you're having your final breaths on this earth? What are you thinking about? What's in your consciousness? It's your relationships. It's who you've touched and your children, your parents, those closest to you. It's not about, reaching certain ceilings and thresholds, right, financially.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I have loved everything that we've discussed. I could talk to you about all of these things. Is there anything that you want to share before we go?
No, I'm just so happy that you're doing this and sharing your expertise with the world, because you have such a dynamic background, and thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so grateful you were here. And remember, Eyla also mentioned Unbound, the book, and that is very powerful. So maybe you can get started there and see if that sparks anything in you. And also in nursing school, they showed us the documentary, The Business of Being Born. Can't believe they showed us that in a mainstream nursing school, but it was really an eye-opener. So whatever you're choosing, just inform yourself, be empowered, and know that this is your experience and you get to decide what's right for you, whatever that is. And we're both here to remind you that this is your experience. It doesn't have to look like someone else's, but it's important to trust yourself and to create that safety from within. And that will facilitate a better experience for you and for the baby.
Absolutely, yeah. There is no wrong or right here. It's simply what is in the most authentic alignment with what you want.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much. And that is it for today. Thank you for listening to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review, ideally a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge and really helps me to be able to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and High Maintenance Hippie Podcast. If you have any feedback or guests that you'd like to have, I would love to hear from you so that I'm not just talking at you. I really want to deliver things that are valuable. So send me an email with any feedback, suggestions, or ideas for guests at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And I will leave you with a disclaimer. Please know that this is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.